Hi, welcome to the Moral Injury Support Network podcast. I'm Dr. Danny Roberts, President and CEO of Moral Injury Support Network for Service Women Incorporated, a nonprofit organization in North Carolina specializing in helping women veterans recover from traumas faced while serving in the military. Today, our guest is Stephen Hewer. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in nutrition in 1990 and has been in private practice ever since. Mercury toxicity from dental fillings in 1976 devastated his health and set him onto a path of natural healing. So today we want to talk about his path and talk about the work he's doing. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Daniel Roberts. Thanks for having the show. And I appreciate what you're doing because often thought about that with regards to men and women in the service, how their conscience could be violated in following orders from higher command. And I've always thought, how do they deal with that? So that's pretty
Yeah,
cool. You're helping that.
yeah, I appreciate that. And we're getting we have some great projects going on. But one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because when we're working with women veterans, it's not just about their mental health. Often they have a whole range of issues that need help with, from financial and physical. And lately we've been having actually some guests that are doing medical stuff. And so, as I encounter women who get referred to us for help, uh, teeth is often a thing for people,
Yeah.
So this is apropos, even though we're not specifically talking about moral injury still. When your teeth are bad or you're suffering because of teeth, I mean, that affects everything, right?
Yeah. And it's just a sign of more deeper underlying biochemical starvation. Yeah. The body, it produces a specific form of calcium to regulate bone formation and dental health. That it does that efficiently up to age 35, and after that, its production declines. And that form of calcium is called ionic calcium. And you can't, and up until the late 1990s, you couldn't take it as a supplement. It didn't exist. And all the calciums that you can take on the market are not providing you that form. So that form of calcium is it's individual atoms of calcium and it's missing two electrons. It's called ionic calcium. And that's what the body uses to make bones, and that's what the body uses to repair the teeth and the enamel, and to, along with phosphorus, and also to cause intercellular pH to be maintained where it should, 7.3545, to enable cells to make energy or divide into new cells, to enable the body to make adult stem cells, to allow your brain to release neurotransmitters. You have to have ionic calcium to stimulate the nerves to cause a polarization of the axon and cause the release of neurotransmitters. Your heart needs it to beat, your muscles need it to contract. So it's involved in so many things. It's almost like a hormone.
Yeah.
And so when you're deficient after age 35, depending upon how your lifestyle, and so basically the body's metabolism is to produce energy, and the byproduct of energy production is acids. So whether it's converting carbohydrates into energy or whether it's metabolizing amino acids, you get this lactic acid, citric acid, nitric acid, phosphoric acid, sulfuric acid, carbonic acid, a bunch of different acids that are produced. So the body produces more acids in a day than alkali. And when you're young, your body's compensating for that. It's not as big of a deal. When you're older, 45, 55 and on up, your body becomes progressively more acidic. And so when you become more acidic, the blood pH becomes threatened. So the blood has to stay in a very narrow pH window, 7.35, 7.45. But the blood also has to receive all of the toxins from the digestive tract, all the carbonic acid and things that have to be carried to the kidneys for elimination, and to the liver for elimination. And so it's constantly accepting acid compounds into its circulatory system. And so those things, if there's too many, then it threatens the blood pH. So if the threat to the blood pH becomes too great from these acids produced from metabolism and from a bad diet and stress, then the body has to get that alkalinity from somewhere, and it starts to disassemble proteins and minerals from the bone structure to get it. So calcium is the main alkalinizing mineral the body needs and uses. So it disassembles bone to get at the calcium to start to alkalinize the body. And it also disassembles red blood cells and other tissues. So you start to lose incremental amounts of proteins in your cartilage or your discs, incremental amounts of proteins from your red blood cells, because your red blood cells, um, you can have anemia from over acidification because you lose so many red blood cells. The red blood cells are being killed to release three amino acids that will neutralize those acids. Arginine, histidine, and lysine can be used to buffer and neutralize those acids. So you can have an anemia problem simply from being too acidic and not have from an iron deficiency or a B12 deficiency. And so that's one mechanism of the body stealing out of the jawbone, stealing out of the teeth. When you steal out of the jawbone and you get osteoporosis of the jawbone or start to get osteoporosis of the jawbone, the gums are going to recede, and then enamel is going to start to erode, and your teeth will eventually get loose, and you'll have to, you get cavities or have your teeth will fall out when you're older. And then the other one, when I was saying in the beginning on the ionic calcium, that the level of that in the blood is supposed to be maintained at 51% in the blood. And then the parathyroid tissue that's on four dots of tissue on your thyroid gland monitors the levels of that form of calcium. So when it falls below 51%, your parathyroid says we have an emergency. So it turns on parathyroid hormone production. That hormone circulates through the body and gets to the bones, and it causes your bones to dissolve to get at, again, the calcium that's in the bones to try and compensate for this ionic calcium deficiency. And it doesn't work because the calcium comes out as a calcium phosphate crystal, and it's actually not the individual atoms of calcium missing two electrons. So it's an attempt to compensate for the problem. It doesn't succeed. And then when your body's losing this bone in a calcium phosphate crystal, it can't go back into the bone, circulates through the body, and it's a tendency for it to deposit in your soft tissues. So now you experience calcification of your arteries, your heart valve, your brain, your soft tissues, your kidneys. All these things start to become more stone-like because of this deficiency of ionic calcium and an acid pH. They go hand in hand. And so I've had clients that have followed this. I met a man years ago who developed a specially processed form of calcium that was just calcium oxide that he processed at this special proprietary temperature that made it so that the bond between the oxygen and the calcium was weak, so that when you added it to water, the oxygen would come off and you'd have Ca2 plus ionic calcium, 23.5 milligrams in that one glass of water that you just reacted with. And you could drink that down and then do that twice a day on an empty stomach. And it has to be absorbed through the stomach wall. So you have to do it on an empty stomach. You don't want it to be mixed with food. You don't want it to go into the GI tract, because then once it's in the GI tract, it becomes bound to calcium binding proteins. And then it's protein bound calcium and it doesn't do what you're wanting it to do. So years ago, I had clients, basically lady named Kate Graff with gum recession, and the dentist said, it's not reversible. So I put her on this product, atomic calcium. I got her on a growth hormone enhancing product and some cofactor vitamins. And in 6 months, her gums grew back and her eyelashes grew better than ever. And, all her hair grew in thicker than ever, from all these things that happened from those combination of nutrients. And then years later, I had another lady with osteopenia. So she essentially, Kate Graff, reversed the osteoporosis in her jawbone. And that caused, and plus the growth hormone releasing product caused her gums to grow back. Um, and then later, I had a lady with osteopenia, and she got on the same program. And it was only in 2 months. She'd been searching for 2 years doing other nutritional programs without success. And then she did mine. And in 2 months, she redid her test and her bones were dense again. And so I've had these small handful number of successes, and I'd like more women to know about this, because when women get older and they don't have the estrogen levels that their body produced when they were younger, that combines with this deficiency of ionic calcium and this deficiency of, or this overly acidic pH to create a never-ending bone loss problem. And then that leads to fractures. Like we have a friend of the family who's 82 now, I think. But when she was 80, she's like a yoga instructor and she's an exercise fanatic up to her 60s, aerobics, weightlifting, all that stuff, which people are taught weight bearing exercises is the main thing to do to stimulate the bones. This is
Yeah.
piezoelectric effect to cause bone formation. And as valuable as it is, there's a lot of people don't have the energy to do weight bearing exercises or enough exercise to really activate that
Yeah.
mechanism. And it's still not as strong as fixing the biochemistry. So this lady, even though she was an organic food nut, ate perfectly, keto diet, and did all her fitness stuff, at 80, she was just simply closing a blind, like pulling the string on a cord, and five of her vertebrae fractured
Oh,
just from
wow.
that.
Wow. Holy
So
cow.
bone loss is a silent process. You can't tell anything's going on until you actually experience the break.
Right.
Unless you're doing DEXA scans, these X-rays of your
Yeah.
bones, and
Right.
you're seeing what's going on. But so women, 23% of women are, in their 70s and 80s experiencing hip fractures. And so that's almost a death sentence if you don't know what I know with regards to how to restore and fix the body's biochemistry. It's very difficult for women to heal in their late 70s and 80s with a hip fracture, and many of
Right.
them die.
Yeah.
And
My,
lots of
let me stop you there. I have a couple of questions I want to ask before we go too much farther. I just want to say to your last point, my wife is a beautician and all of her customers are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. Women, because she works in a nursing home and does that there. And it's just so many, it's a death knell. As soon as she hears, well, Edith fell and fractured her hip,
ah,
Edith's probably going to be dead within a short period of time. And it's so sad.
it
But
is.
yeah, but the one thing I wanted to ask you as you're going through this that came to mind is would stress speed up this process of bone loss and so on, all this
Yeah.
acidic chemicals. I'm thinking like women that are constantly, uh, women in the military that are constantly on adrenaline or constantly under stress because of harassment and the different things they go through on a regular basis. Is that like speeding up this sort of decaying process, if you will? If that may not be the right way to say it, but
No, yeah, it's a good way to say it because basically the stress causes the body to become acidic.
yeah,
So the body has to produce cortisol to address that stress. Cortisol causes the body to break down liver and muscle and bone proteins to get at the proteins and convert them into glucose. So the body needs more glucose at a faster rate than it's getting it from the diet, and to convert that glucose into ATP to handle the stress. Because basically, stress is the absence of enough energy to deal with what's at hand. If you had, 10 times more energy than what was in front of you to deal with, it wouldn't be stressful because you just solved the problem.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, stress causes an acidification of the tissues just from the hormone release, the cascade that happens, and then that the body has to compensate for that excess acidity, and that means that if it's not adequately handled through diet and supplementation, then the body's going to steal it from the bones, and other tissues. So yeah, that's definitely. And I actually, my philosophy is that the military is a long-standing practice of stressing people out and calling it discipline
right,
and punishing, all that stuff, and
right,
not treating people as, basically an equal. So I look at
right.
basically that God individuated God's self in as souls. And so everybody's soul is a piece of God. So everybody's
Yeah,
equal.
right,
It doesn't matter what your body size, shape, gender, it doesn't matter.
right.
Everybody's equal, all having this experience, this human physical experience,
Yep,
learning, growing, evolving, trying to become. The ultimate goal is to try and achieve what Jesus achieved. So Jesus basically was the example and said, "These works and
right,
greater shall you do also."
right,
And so that when you don't have that as your conscious knowing that Jesus is the role model, then whatever your example was of your parents, your aunts, your uncles, whatever elders you grew up with that were the example of how to behave as a man or a woman, that goes into your subconscious, and then that tends to become your pattern of behavior, your
right.
method of expressing your personality.
Absolutely.
And so unfortunately, I was raised in that era where, it's like if you complain about as a boy, if you complain about a physical injury, you're a pussy.
Yeah,
And so
right.
Yeah, that's part of the problem that I experienced
True.
when I was mercury poisoned. So when I had mercury poisoning and the nerves in my intestines were killed and I stopped having elimination and I could barely eat for 4 years, it took a while before I shared my problem with my mom or my dad because I didn't
Yeah,
want to
that,
be called a pussy.
right.
And so anyways, yeah, the philosophy is like if you look at a greenhouse and the conditions for raising a plant are optimal, that the CO2 levels are better, it's not being too much wind, it's too stressing it out too much, it's got better temperature, more even temperature, it's got all the nutrients it needs. That plant will grow like it's in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah,
So, meaning a nurturing environment makes a plant produce more fruit, grow taller, be stronger,
right,
all that. And so I
right.
say it's the same way with humans. There's a certain
Absolutely.
level of healthy stress that we need to incur, but it's
Absolutely.
not draining or depleting or emotionally
Mm,
distressing stress.
yeah,
It's stress to increase physical strength and resilience.
right,
But psychological stress from a superior officer to a serving man or woman is a crime. It's because it's not. It's basically saying I'm
yeah,
superior to you, and you
right,
have to do what I say, even if it violates your conscience, and that's like completely wrong. And at some point, hope humans will evolve and realize the mistake that is, and officers will say this is what we need to do, but they won't treat them as inferiors. They'll just
right.
treat them as equals.
So yeah, I love everything you just said. I wholeheartedly agree with that 100%. When I was in the infantry, even when I was a young man full of piss and vinegar in the infantry, because I spent my entire adult life, except for a handful of years in the military. In the first 10 years of the military, I was in the airborne infantry. In the infantry. I wasn't airborne the whole time. But anyway, I was in the infantry. And I proved that you could, because combat is a crucible, right? And you do need to do stress inoculation to prepare for it. But I proved that you could treat your soldiers, no matter what their rank, with dignity and respect, right? And when the time came, you could you could add the appropriate amount of stress in combat training to make them a well-oiled machine and yet maintain this human dignity. And I did that as a leader. And I was one of the few squad leaders, I think, that did that really well. I'm sort of patting myself on the back, but that's one thing. I did a lot of things really poorly. And I wasn't always the most professional NCO to the people above me. But that was often because I wasn't demeaning my soldiers or minimizing them. I was treating them as equal. And there was one time I was having a meeting with my squad, right? But at the end of the day, you meet with squad, okay, tomorrow we got to do da 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 da, this time to come in, all that stuff, right? And I had a team leader, he's a really good guy. He was a ranger, he was who worked out in the gym, but he was very intense. Um, he's sort of like a Tasmanian devil, great for like set loose on the enemy, but his soldiers didn't exactly respect him, right? So anyway, we're having this meeting, and I was going over this stuff, and at the end of the meeting, he said, "Hey, Sergeant Roberts, can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "How do you do that?" And I said, "What? Do what?" And he said, "Get them to listen to you." He said, "The whole time you're having that meeting, they were listening to you and writing everything down, and they don't do that for me." And I said one thing. I said, well, I basically treat them like an equal. As far as I'm concerned, regardless of their rank, we're all equal. And it came from my Christian background, right? That's
Yeah.
where I said, we're all equal. And I just been around longer, I have more rank, I have more responsibility, and we all have a job to do, but I'm just talking to equal people who get paid less and have a different job. And
Hmm.
that blew his mind.
That's
Like he
good.
didn't know what to do with that,
You planted the
right?
seed.
Because he was
Yeah.
programmed to this demeaning, it not always abusive, but just like this superior to inferior kind of way to treat people. Even
Yeah.
when I remember, I'll give you one last story, we'll get back on it, but so we had guard mount, right? We had guard on a weekend, and it was like they handpicked like I think it was 6 soldiers. Like you got guard this weekend. It was like, Lord. It was like, Sergeant Roberts, you're going to be in charge. I was like, okay. So I told the soldiers, it was one of those get up early Saturday morning, be in, the full uniform, and just we had to be uh various guard posts around the base. And so I told the soldiers, I said, hey, I'm not going to come in early and wake you up. You all can set alarm clocks. But guard mount, that formation is exactly at this time, right? And so I show up, everybody's ready except for two soldiers. And I went to their room, knocked on the door, they opened the door, they had slept in. And of course I yelled, I went off, and then when they came out fully dressed, they did quite a few push-ups. I don't remember how many I gave them, but and then after I was done with it, I said, okay, that's done. Let's go do guard mount. And the rest of the day, I didn't talk to him about it. I didn't remind him. I didn't treat him like anything. I didn't call him names. We did the thing. It's 24-hour duty. After it was done, whatever, right? So then that next Monday, I'm walking through the barracks. They don't belong to me. They're not in my squad. They're in the platoon. But they had the squad leader was a real a-hole. I mean, he was constantly like demeaning people, yelling, that kind of stuff, right? So these two soldiers who I'd never talked to before the weekend, they started following me around like puppy dogs. Hey, Sar, how you doing? How you doing? They respected me so much. They were like, "Hey, can we get in your squad? Can you why? Because I treat them like adults. When they failed, I did corrective action, but I never demeaned them. When they were doing push-ups, I just talked to them, hey, you're an adult, you're a soldier, just giving them expectations. But they knew that, you know, the treatment was totally different. Instead of having a demeaning person who
Yep.
was always treating them like privates, they had a person that said, hey, they knew they screwed up and they knew they owed those push-ups.
Yeah.
But they knew, hey, with Roberts and word was around, people go, oh, Roberts is great. So, and I do have to give you one final story. I'm sorry. So,
Okay.
one time I screwed up big time, and it would have got me in big time trouble. And I won't give you the whole details. It was an accident, but it was one of those unforgivable accidents, right? My soldiers, every one of them covered for me. They lied for me to the lieutenant because we had that bond. I wasn't
Yeah.
hanging out with them over the weekend, drinking beers and all that. It was professional, but it was like when I came to work, I love my job. I treated them, and we had a great time. So, all to your point, a little bit of bragging on my part, but still, that's the idea of what you're saying is true. People think you have to do combat training or do military training, you have to demean people, and you absolutely do not. They volunteered to join the army knowing it
Amen.
was going to be tough. So when you give them tough training, they expect that. They want that. But when you demean people, then you just demotivate them, you hurt their morale, and you can cause some permanent mental health damage for sure. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I'm really glad you shared that because, it just highlights the fact that your relationship and therefore the soldiers' willingness to cooperate is all increased because they're not experiencing internal stress because they feel they're being treated as an equal. And that's the whole thing. It's like,
right,
if you look at how martial artists that are really masters, they're, Bruce Lee being one of the best, of course, it's like he didn't let he didn't become psychologically offended by whoever was challenging him. He
right,
saw the paper tiger, the ego for what it was, and accepted that that was where they were in their evolution, and stayed centered, stayed balanced, stayed calm, so that he was so poised that he could make the fast moves he needed to make to defend himself, take down his opponent, and then not even try and do it so that he killed the opponent, just put him in his place so that he was like injured enough to not want to fight anymore.
right.
And that's basically, seeing your fellow man as your equal, not as your enemy. And, part of being able to change society is everyone getting on the same page and being united that we're all part of the same family, part of the same creation, and that we can get a lot more accomplished if we cooperate with each other than, collaborate, cooperate than if we treat each other as superior and inferior and intimidate and demean.
Yeah.
And that's part of humanity evolving to that place where that's the way behavior is exchanged. And then the
Yeah.
people that are
And
the wisest are put in positions of power. The people that have the most wisdom
yeah.
and the most emotional poise, the most, because basically the ocean of life, like this, when you're talking about quantum physics and stuff, you're talking about there's an omnipresent force field called we call God or whatever you want to call it, and so it creates and maintains everything. But that force field is absolute coherence, absolute peace, absolute love, and absolute joy. And so we're all walking around in this, just like fish are in the ocean. And it's like we're in this ocean of energy, but our minds cause us through thoughts and feelings to tune into to distorted thoughts and negative emotions
Yeah.
and make us out of tune with that energy. And so the more we can tune ourselves to that energy, the more personal joy and happiness we experience, but the more solutions come to us in terms of in
Right.
society, what's needed for. Like
Right.
we need free energy. We don't need to pollute the planet. We should be using free energy. Why aren't we? Because there's people in corporations and positions of power that want to continue to have a stranglehold on their method of making money that's polluting the planet. And, but there's more power in that love than there is in fear, hate, anger, and intimidation. People uh, need to truly access it. Part of the thing is that a culture that thrives and survives is a culture that's spiritually connected. And to me, I always teach that fasting is part of like juice fasting, intestinal cleansing and juice fasting, doing a 7 day or 10 day juice fast once a year, clean out your intestines, and that resets you back to your innocent God self inside of you, your soul energy, and you start to see the traumas of the past lose their emotional impact on you. You look at them as incidences that no longer have an emotional hold over you, and because you've just touched base with joy again inside yourself. And you've got renewed energy and stuff. So, like I see that people in prison that are truly criminals, it's like my method of solving the problem is that I would, if they were in this institution, the institution would actually work to heal them. I would put them on juice fast, colon cleanse, give them all the nutrients, detoxify the lead,
Yeah.
mercury, cadmium, cobalt, aluminum out of their bodies. So their nervous system starts to work optimally again. They get proper hormone, proper neurotransmitter production. And I believe you could restore a ton of deranged men to sanity simply by addressing the physiological toxicities, imbalances, nutrient deficiencies they have.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point. And I think, this more and more people are coming to understand that the body keeps score and all that kind of ideas, but it sort of came to I sort of tacitly believed that. And I certainly quoted it. I believed it, not to say I didn't believe it, but you know, I really, really experienced it recently, when I was having some major insomnia. And as I began to address those things, I realized, okay, there's a mental health component to this for sure, but there's also a physical component. And so what just in a small example, by taking a low dose medication to sleep, um, it what it would do, I was still having some of the dreams that were causing me before to wake up like in a panic
Mm.
and spend the whole night like pacing the floor trying to calm down.
Hmm.
But what happened was with the medication stopped the adrenaline from pumping. It stopped the major like physiological reactions. So, so when I wasn't having those, my mind was clear enough, even if I would wake up, not completely awake, but even if I'd wake up some to where I had some awareness, I was able to sift through what I was thinking and feeling in a more emotionally neutral way and was able to go back to sleep fairly quickly. right?
Hmm.
Because that the physiological response, the amygdala was sort of like kept much quieter, right? I
Yeah.
wasn't pumping adrenaline to where before I would be up all night walking the floor, yawning, knowing I was physically tired, but knowing there's no way if I go back to bed, I'm falling asleep.
Yeah.
I just could not do it. This low dose of stuff, it's like I'm not trying to solve my mental health problem with the low dose. I'm just trying to get sleep so that the next day I can be clear. I can get up in the morning going, wow, I had a great night of sleep. And because when I was pacing the floor, I thought, please, I couldn't wait for daylight to come because when daylight came, I know I could get out, walk. I have a 2 mile walk I do. I could go do my walk. I could start thinking. I could just, everything changes when the light shows, right? When the daylight comes, whatever
Yeah.
problems you had at night, all of a sudden, you feel much better able to handle them in most cases, right? You're just like, okay, it just, you feel safer, all this stuff, which
Yeah.
there's a great spiritual lesson in that we won't get into. But yeah, so just that low dose of sleep medication just helped the physical part. And I've been getting pretty good sleep ever since. I'm still going to deal with the mental health stuff, right? Because I want to
Yeah.
get at whatever, and I've increased my spiritual uh activities in terms of my study, my prayer, meditation. I've increased those because I realized those were starting to lack, and I was starting to get into my head too much about problems I was facing in business or whatever else, and I wasn't leaning on that spiritual truth and engaging spiritually. So that's made a huge difference too, a definite difference. So what we're sort of talking about is we kind of have kind of covered all the bases here is just there's a holistic way to do life, and you can't forget about this. It's amazing how this one nutrient, this calcium, is so absolutely critical to everything in your life. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's, basically there's laws of nature. The body's designed to function on those laws. The American people, when they immigrated to America, most people lost touch with their roots. And so the traditions that their ancestors practiced were no longer carried on. And so we had a few decades of soil fertility. And then,
Right.
if soil fertility was lost, they could tell, a woman would, every time she gave birth to a new child, she'd lose a tooth if there wasn't enough minerals in the foods they were growing. And so once that started to happen, then they'd pick up stakes and they'd move to a new location where they hadn't been farming that area. It was fresh soil. And then when chemical agriculture was introduced in 1945 after World War II, it took about 10 years for the big farmlands to become thoroughly demineralized and all the humus to be destroyed and microbial life. So then you have the plants become weak, and insects are designed by nature, by God, to destroy weak plants. So then you have insects attacking these plants, and then the solution was to spray them with pesticides.
Yeah, right,
Um,
right,
so we have this whole thing.
right.
So now
Yeah.
everybody born from the 50s forward, mid to late 50s forward, started to have less quality food than their parents and grandparents did. So our bodies became weaker genetically because
Yeah.
that's what happens when you don't have all the minerals and nutrients present at the time of conception and then gestation. Then the body's going to rob from the optimal the development of each organ system corresponding to the lack of those nutrients for that organ system. And you end up with people with physically and mentally inferior bodies to their parents and grandparents. And and then not being breastfed because that was kind of common in the 50s and 60s and 70s. You have more problems. So then you've got more weaknesses. Some people that got all those good things, maybe they were breastfed, born and raised on a farm, they got good genetics, then they got tank constitutions. They can drink and smoke and do all
Yeah.
these offending
Right.
things, and they're still going strong and have, good moods and everything. But, I had adrenal exhaustion when I was 20 because I went 4 years hardly eating because of that problem with my bowels not moving from the mercury poisoning. So I had adrenal fatigue. So then that created the tendencies for, low energy and sleep problems now later in life because the adrenals don't
Right.
regulate my cortisol properly. Um, Even though I eat perfectly, there's still certain injuries that took place from how I was born and raised, and then, the things of the mercury and what that did. But people don't realize that, you know, food is not food anymore. It doesn't contain the nutrient levels it used to have.
Right.
And
Right.
then food is supposed to donate electrons to your body. So basically, when you look at the body as a battery that's supposed to turn a car over, the car battery won't turn the engine over if it's not at 12 volts. If the car battery is at 9 volts, it won't actually have the power to crank the
Right.
engine on.
Right.
So the body's the same way. The body's supposed to have cell membranes are supposed to be at minus 25, 20 to 25 millivolt at the membrane, and the overall pH of the body is supposed to be 7.305, 7.45. So when you're alkaline in your blood, in your tissues, you have free electrons. You are and able to donate those electrons to the process of making energy, neutralizing free radicals. When your body pH is acidic, and the pH also controls oxygen. So when you have an alkaline pH, you have proper oxygen levels, which is also involved, of course, in creating in the mitochondria, just like the carburetor of a car. You have to have oxygen, gas vapor, and the spark to create the explosion. The same thing with the mitochondria: oxygen, glucose to convert on the mitochondria, then or the spark to convert that into energy. But if there's not enough oxygen, you get less energy and more lactic acid. So when your pH is acidic, 6.9 or lower, which you can measure with pH paper in the morning, you can spit on pH paper between 5 and 7 a.m. If you're 6.9 or lower, you're acidic. So you have less than optimal oxygen levels. You have a deficiency of electrons. So now you have inflammation, you have fatigue, you have all these problems. And the body tries to keep you alive by robbing Peter to pay Paul, robbing from the bones to compensate, or robbing from some tissues. And so uh, there's, when you're young, you don't notice these things as much because your body is producing more hormones. You live on your hormones. You can feel good from just having good optimal
Right.
hormones. But when you're older, 55, 60 or whatever or beyond, then now you can feel things more. And what you've been doing, what you were raised on is no longer optimal because cooked foods, I've experienced that cooked foods are very draining because they've lost their electrons. So basically, raw living foods and raw vegetable juices and raw milk and sprouted things, they all have electrons. They all have superoxide dismutase, catalase, and glutathione, and these things that are donating high amounts of electrons into the body. So they're living foods. So they're inputting energy to compensate for your loss of energy from your daily living of expending energy. So, if a person comes to me for a consultation, then I teach them that if you want high quality life, you will work to modify your diet and become accustomed to more plant-based raw living foods. That's what's going to input more energy and make you feel stronger and healthier and happier again. And when you get rid of the inflammation from that, because you're drinking lots of vegetable juice, which is very anti-inflammatory, and then your body's not putting out the fires of inflammation with protein synthesis to heal tissues from free radical damage, then your body has all this extra energy freed up with which to create optimal neurotransmitters, increase telomerase enzyme and lengthen telomeres, keep your cells younger, make them younger, um, and you feel it. It's just palpable. And I like to get people to do that 7 to 10 day juice fast and colon cleanse because that's like a baptism. You want to be reborn and feel happy to be alive again. That's the fastest way to get there.
So, great. Thank you. As we wrap up, um, you mentioned early on the show um, the products that people can
Yeah.
drink, right? Is that still available? Where do they get that?
Yeah, yeah. They want to go to getbonesofsteel.com. So the URL is just getbonesofsteel.com. And
Okay,
then when you
great.
go there, it'll show these packages. There's 3 packages: basic, medium, advanced. And if you
Okay.
buy those, then you will be on the road to supporting your bone remineralization.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to look at that, and I want people to have that. We'll put that in the show notes for people that are maybe watching on their computer. And is that how they get in touch with you too? Is that a way to get if they
They,
want a
they
consultation or if they want to work with you in some
If
way?
they want to do the consultation, they would be better off going to my other site, which is synergisticnutrition.com.
Okay.
Synergistic nutrition.com.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen, been a real blessing to talk to you, and it was really cool how we got into some good spiritual things and some good,
Yeah.
that was a great side benefit. So
Thanks for having me on,
yeah,
Dr.
I
Daniel.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
So anyway, good to talk to you again, and I hope people really get into this. I'm definitely going to be looking at it because as you're talking, I'm hearing, yeah, I know I could use some of that. So,
Yeah.
all right, great, thanks.
Thank you too.